Hi, I'm Jennifer Wild, and you're listening to Sober Exposure. If it's about recovery, we're gonna cover it. It's like one big therapy session, but it's free. So thanks for joining our dysfunctional family as we uncover recovery with Sober Exposure. Let's go. Welcome, Sober Exposure. I'm Jennifer Wild. Got a big treat for you today. So usually I give a big introduction and I say all your credentials, but because I'm so ADHD, there's no way I'm going to be able to memorize or even write down all your credentials. There's so many. We have invited Dr. Faber, and welcome to Sober Exposure. Thank you so much for coming this early hour. How are you?
I'm very good. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, a week away from Thanksgiving, but who knows when you're listening to this or watching this, when it'll be. First question, I was talking about all your credentials. Can you tell us all your credentials? Because I can't remember. There's so many.
Well, just briefly, and the credentials add credibility, but it's really the results we want, right? But I'm a double board certified psychiatrist, both in adult and child and adolescent psychiatry. In addition, I've done a fellowship and got a board certification at the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Metabolic Medicine, which then led me to going to George Washington U and doing a fellowship in metabolic medicine. And I'm probably one of the first, if the first psychiatrist to get that degree. And
what is, I hate to interrupt, but what is metabolic medicine?
Well, metabolic medicine, integrative medicine, you can somewhat use interchangeably, but it's really trying to understand how the body affects all organ systems. So my traditional training with psychiatry was, hey, if there's something wrong with the brain, it's going to affect your gut, it's going to affect your heart rate, it's going to affect your immune system, but it can work the other way too, reverse wise. So your adrenal glands, if you've got too much cortisol, guess what? That can affect your brain and how it works. If your hormone levels are too high or too low, from thyroid to progesterone, estrogen, that can affect your brain. We used to think of psychiatric disorders as primarily those of a neurotransmitter depletion. Yes, that's true, but how come anywhere from, depending who you read, 35 to 55% of people aren't getting better? And so we're starting to see, is there something more inflammatory going on? And so this is sort of a new wave saying, hey, I'm depressed, but I'm also overweight. I got joint pain, stomach problems, urinating frequently. Is there something else going on besides just having not enough serotonin?
Yeah. And people that are like non-responsive, we were talking before we started that I basically am non-responsive, have been non-responsive to every form of treatment for depression and anxiety and ADD, all of it. None of it works for me, but I also am I've been diagnosed with everything, total addict. And my first question that I really want to ask you that is so important. So many of us here are struggling with addiction on this podcast. Can you see addiction on a brain scan?
Well, we can't see the quote unquote addiction on the brain scan. What we can see on scans is where the brain's working too little or where the brain's working too much, and then start to target focused treatment towards those particular areas to help them work more effectively. We see people using drugs and alcohol or other, substances, depending on parts of their brain they're trying to calm down that they're not even really aware of. I gave a talk yesterday talking about basal ganglia, which is a inner sub neurological area where if it's working too hard, people get anxious. What do? You go drink or use benzos to calm them down. And it works, but there's residual problems. One is they're addictive. Two, our whole cortex is an area where it can be very toxic.
Damaging. So those of us who have blown our brains out with drugs for 25, 30 years, that shows up.
You'll
correct?
See on the cortex, if there's been a lot of use, we'll see certain patterns, notably on the cortex, that say, hey, this has done some damage. That's sort of the not so pleasant news. The good news is there's things you can do to try to help reverse that as well.
Okay, well, I want to go there. I want to see what is it that we can do to reverse it. First, I want to talk a tiny bit about, so I found you because of my embarrassing guilty pleasure, the Kardashians, and they were talking about Dr. Amen, I guess, I don't remember which one, Kendall, I think, and she was doing a brain scan. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to have this guy on my podcast. So I reached out, and that's how I found out about the Amen Clinic, Dr. Amen Clinic, or it's just, he's the one that started it. And what is it that's different about that clinic that you're affiliated with than just any other psychiatry or neurology physician?
Yeah, I think one is, this is the similar part, is we listen, but the second part is we look. We look at the brain and see what areas appear to be working too hard or too little, and then make more target-focused decisions based upon what we see. This is, my opinion, is kind of the wave where medicine, brain health is going. 25, 30 years ago, we just didn't have the technologies as developed as we do now, from SPECT scan, which looks at blood flow to the brain. That's what we do. But, PET scans will be interesting to follow, fMRIs, and some of the other technologies to see what we can glean from those technologies to help brain get better. The only way we really had, besides doing an MRI, which didn't tell us much, was if you wanted to go get tissue samples of brain and see what's working and not working. Well, who's going to do a brain biopsy?
Ew, then you have to go.
Yeah, thank you.
Just find a way to take a picture of it, please. Yeah, don't start drilling in my brain. I mean, it makes sense. Thank goodness that we are finding this technology, because if I break my knee, we look at my knee and we figure out how to help my knee. I have a shoulder problem. I have an MRI with my shoulder. So it only makes sense that you look in the brain. And so you let's say you're looking inside my brain, you see all this mumble jumble. If I came to you and I got that particular scan, what's it called? It's a special.
It's called SPECT, SPECT. So like SPECT, but put a T on the end of it, SPECT scan.
Okay. What is it? What is the benefit? What am I going to get out of you seeing the inside of my brain? How is that going to help me, my depression, my anxiety, my ADHD, my chronic relapsing? What's that going to do?
Yeah. So it gives us the ability to see what neuroanatomic regions of the brain.
And what does that mean?
Well,
listen, I'm going to de-geek you. I'm going to make you come down to layman's terms here with us. Okay.
Yeah. So there's different parts of the brain where we see different associated symptoms. So for example, your anterior cingulate cortex, big geeky word, but it's basically, if I put my finger here and went in for about half of an inch, there's a part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, and it's anterior, it's in the front. If that part of our brain, and this is from doing the 190 some thousand scans, we see if that's overactive, people tend to not be able to go with the flow, so to speak. So most of us, we like to go from one thought to another rhythm. If that area gets too much blood flow, we see people get really stuck. All right. Now, what does that mean when people get stuck? Okay. It can mean a few things. One is we're talking. Mm-hmm. And like I say something, it doesn't make sense. We get stuck. So rather than listening to me, we might divert our attention, just look outside and watch the cars go by. Right. So you're focusing, but on the right thing. So in essence, you're daydreaming.
That's ADHD, right?
That's one type of ADHD. So there's people that get distracted, ADD, but then there's people who focus, but they're not focused on what they're supposed to. All right. People who have substance use issues. All right. They can get stuck on those thoughts and can't get them out of their head if that part's
Do you mean the compulsions, the thoughts of compulsions and wanting to use?
So obsessions.
Yes.
Compulsions. All right. That part of our brain, we get stuck. So if you look at like substance abuse, since we're talking about that, that's a whole interesting subject. But there's sort of two phases we look at to substance use from a research domain, but then it applies to reality. There's one, the urge, and then two, there's the reward. Now, what does that mean? It means the urge is people get triggered. Substance abusers will go into situations, they see something, smell something, hear something, and it sends a message from our eyes to our thalamus, which goes to our part of our brain called the hippocampus. That's our memory center.
And we get euphoric recall.
Yeah, it says, oh, that reminds me of, the time I was at this party and I smoked weed and we had a great time. And so unconsciously that sends a message to a part of our brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is our reward center. And our reward center says start shooting off dopamine. So we start.
Oh, we love dopamine. Give me more. Give me more. Can you put that in a pill?
Yeah. So we start shooting out dopamine. All right. And if you look at dopamine, when you have those urges, it goes way up. So all of a sudden we start having these urges to use. It's like, where are these coming from? We might not even know unconsciously, but our brain's picking it up. If your anterior cingulate goes back to that, if it's too active and we get stuck, we're going to have a harder time letting go of those urges.
Okay.
All right. And so there is a problem. And so if you don't address that anterior cingulate area, that can cause some real challenges. But if you don't look and see, you do not know.
You don't know what you have.
Yeah.
So how do you treat it? What do you do to treat it?
So higher association of anterior cingulate being active, we see a lower amount of serotonin produced.
And what's the difference between serotonin and dopamine?
So they're two different neurotransmitters that have different receptors they bond to. Serotonin is more of a mood stabilizer. It helps us stay calm, not depressed. Helps us from not daydreaming. Dopamine's like a neurotransmitter. If we get pleasure, it goes way up and it feels good. The problem with substance abuse is when you use, you get this huge flux of dopamine it's too much, and so we get and want that higher amount when in essence we probably should be just getting a little. Now, since you brought up the dopamine, and we'll come back to the anterior cingulate, if you look at
what's an anterior cingulate? I'm not going to let you do this.
Your anterior cingulate cortex, that's the area of your brain,
okay.
That's like a half inch under where I'm pointing right now.
Okay.
Right? If you look at dopamine, and if you think of the urge, I want to use, and then the reward. How do you feel after you use?
Like shit. I just want to kill myself.
This is the crazy part. It's like the urge, your dopamine levels, high. The reward you use, guess what? There's a lot less dopamine. All right. And just like you said, people use, it's like, I don't feel that great. In fact, the consequences afterwards, we really feel a hard time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, because when we first get high, we feel great, but afterwards, the come down is just miserable. Is that because we blew out all of our dopamine?
Well, there's less dopamine that's available. The other thing we see is the more people use, guess what? The less the reward. The experience isn't as great as the first time. You don't get as much. So dopamine urge is a lot higher than dopamine getting the reward, which is this is the crazy part. And so part of the question is how do we control that urge? And this is kind of where research and studies, I think, are going. And we know some, but not nearly enough on how to help that dopamine level get to a level during the urge. How do we control that? How do we get it to decrease? Substance abusers, you see people do really well. They do really well. Then all of a sudden something triggers happen, dopamine goes way up, and then people suddenly start using again. And that's the hardest thing. And we're still learning how to deal with that ourselves, just from a scientific basis. We see people in our practice, they do really well. Then something happens, they get triggered, and boom.
And what do they do to have them start doing well? They get their diagnosis or whatever. You look inside their brain, and then what do you do to put them on a well path? You put them on supplements.
So back if your anterior cingulate's too active.
Okay.
All right. You can use medications if you so choose. Things like Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, they will all increase serotonin. Or you can look at supplements, which is sort of my go-to initially. Things like 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is a precursor molecule to make serotonin. St. John's wort, that's the one people have heard of.
Really? Yeah, we've heard about that for years. And you would I always thought it was kind of hocus pocus. Like, I didn't believe in it, really. It was like, oh, give me, but I've changed my ways. I was like, give me the pharmaceuticals, give me the real stuff, give me the Prozac, give me the strong ones. And that never worked. And so I've been going to more of a holistic approach, and I see it feels like
Yeah. So there's something called saffron, like saffron the spice, which we're seeing the last couple of 2-3 years. We've seen some really promising data on using that to help balance serotonin physiology. It's one I'd be watching
Really?
closely.
You heard
Yeah.
it here first on Sober Exposure. Saffron, look out for it.
Yeah. It's becoming much more popular and widely used. So those are just 3 supplements and medications if we were targeting that area. Now, the substance abuse brain typically has a lot of other problematic, areas. It's not just one. Most people, it's not one.
No, there's so
It's
many
a bunch.
dimensions. Yeah.
And it's the brain is not the easiest organ, right, to understand, but we start looking and start coming up with multiple areas that we've got to help the brain work better if we're going to get better.
How far are we from a cure for just a cure from substance abuse?
That's a good question, and I don't really have a good answer. I can tell you this. This is where I'd be watching closely. If you look at, say, just alcohol, you have 100 people. Oh, I'm going to get sober. I'm not going to use anymore. A year later, guess how many people are still sober?
2.
30%.
Yeah. Oh, 30. That's high. That's actually a lot higher than I thought.
That's better. But that means, hey, 70% of people, we've got to get more creative. If you're using something else, from cocaine to marijuana, THC, that's a whole nother topic, to any of them, only 20% are still sober after a year. And so the challenges are huge.
So THC, it's huge because now it's legal. And I'm an addict. According to the conventional ways, I'm not supposed to use THC. However, it helps a lot with anxiety, depression, some pain that I have.
Well, it's hard. Cannabis, there's 2 active ingredients. There's cannabinoid, CBD oil, which actually looks fairly safe. And then the other ingredient is the THC. And the THC is very toxic, and it is not your brain's best friend. Now, historically, if you go back to pot back in the 1990s, and you took a plant, cut it, and you measured the amount of THC percent-wise, guess how much THC was in those plants? About 2%.
Not as much as there is now.
Yeah, 2%. Now, if you cut it with all the growth and the more sophisticated ways, it's about 20 to 25%. That's 10 times higher. All right. So that's a lot more. Marijuana. Now, what are we seeing? If you look at the research, the data, we're seeing people get more psychotic, more paranoid. We're seeing people's focus get a whole lot less. We've seen people's thought processes just in general diminish, and they're like, what what is going on here? And it's like, well, it's the THC from what you're taking. We can show pictures before and after THC, and there's marked perfusion deficits to the entire cortex. So our surface of our brain,
yes,
our cortex,
yes,
all right, we look at the blood flow over the whole surface.
Okay.
We like to see it be smooth and over the whole surface. When you use THC, we start to get pockets where there's less blood flow to the whole surface of the brain. All right. So what does that look like? Can you
and what does it do? What does it do if there's holes in my brain? Does that make me like not as sharp? Is that why I'm having all these senior moments?
If there's decreased blood flow, depending where it is, we have problems. So like say our frontal lobes underneath, especially, we start having focus issues. Unlike daydreaming, we'll start to get distracted. We'll jump from one topic to another. We also have a harder time making decisions. We get more impulsive. It takes sometimes a lot of energy to make a good decision. If this isn't working well, we'll make a quick decision and not think of it. This area also helps us see judgments. What are the consequences? If it's not working well, we don't see this helping and working as well. For those of you who remember Fast Times of Ridgemont High, right?
That was my skull. I'm so wasted.
Yeah. So Spicoli, I mean, the guy was what? He was hilarious. I mean, that's like a classic movie, but think of how he spoke. Well, man, I want to go to where Australian, gym with the still. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Not passing school. He wasn't thinking clearly. And the problem is the pot affects our whole surface, from the way we think back to the sides, how we hear, listen to things, back, how we see things. I mean, you start to see marked deficits across the whole cortex when you're using marijuana frequently. So therein lies the problem. And that's just the stuff you can buy at the dispensaries, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the
Yeah.
stuff on the streets?
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
you know, I mean, we're seeing it's really kind of concerning and crazy. Um, we've had a few people, family of me pass away, and it's
Fentanyl.
well, it's like, so what's going on? I go, one of the things that's going on, and I've talked to some of my youth in my foundation. I say, what's going on with this stuff on the streets? And they said, it's the middlemen. I go, the middlemen, what do you mean? I go, they're putting all sorts of stuff in it so they get a bigger bang for their buck. So rather than give you a full pot, they'll spray pot with hairspray. Oh, that's nice. They'll put fentanyl in it. Why do they put fentanyl in it? So
That'll
they
kill
get
you.
hooked.
It could. Yeah. And it could kill you, you know. Yeah.
Could kill you. And they don't know. All you know is if you put fentanyl in, you have withdrawal symptoms. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to sweat. I better get some more pot and smoke it. So now you're going back to the.
So you think you have a marijuana addiction, but you really have an opiate addiction because you're getting it on the streets. And this is most likely, doctor, what is happening with our children. Because when you're 18 in most states, you can get your marijuana license and it's safe. It's not, okay, listen, it's not safe for our brain, what I just learned, what it's doing to the brain. However, it's not going to be laced with that stuff from a dispensary, but the kids are going on the street.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
So one of the questions when I hear, oh, well, I'm smoking pot. Well, where are you getting it?
Yeah.
Now, why am I asking? Not just to ask. It's because if you're getting stuff on the streets, it's like, it's getting concerning. CDC in 2021, there was 100,363 deaths associated with substance use. All right. Now, okay, what does that mean? Let's just have some fun with numbers. Per day, that means 274 people are dying per day. Per day. All right. So if you divide by 50 states, you're looking at, 5-6 people per state. I went divided by psychiatry. If you had 30,000 psychiatrists, that means, we're seeing 3 deaths a year.
Wow.
Because people are using. I mean, it's the numbers and it's growing. If you go
it's astonishing. It's
epidemic.
And
it's like, hey, gang, we got to start waking up. Numbers are kind of, they're not sexy. They're not glamorous to look at. But they tell stories, and you have to learn how to look at them, understand them, translate them. Okay. And then come up with other impact plans to help, because, we're seeing a lot more concerns with drugs in our practices, and alcohol, both.
What about the alcohol?
Well, it's sort of the same thing. People will use alcohol as a means to calm down those areas of the brain.
Let me ask you this because we did an episode about naltrexone, and I had the Sinclair method, and I had a woman who's the she does a lot of spokesperson work for that Sinclair method and the naltrexone. Is that a cure? She claims it to be a cure.
For some people, it's a cure. It'll help them stop the urges, decrease. So you drink or use something and you just don't get the high from it like you did before. And it's like, well, why do you want to continue using this? I'm not getting the dopamine. So,
but does it do anything to the brain to take away the cravings? Because that's what they claim.
It's doing something to the brain. I can tell you what, in terms of its molecular action, it blocks opiate receptors called mu opiate receptors that give us the pleasure. So if you block those receptors and you use something, you're not going to get the pleasure.
Yeah. So if you're an alcoholic, I think it's safer to take that than not to, in my opinion, because there's no detrimental side effects to naltrexone. Right?
Some people can get sleepy. Some people have dreams, but in general, no.
It's better than killing someone in a car accident.
Exactly. And then there's the question as well, do you take it orally or do you take an injection? You can get monthly injections. And if you look at the data, the injections probably work better. Why is that? Because people who want to use, you get those urges, like
they won't drink, they won't take the pill. They'll
stop the pill. If you have the injection already in there, it's like it's in you. So
all right. So naltrexone, I'm behind that one. Definitely an advocate of that. there's so many other things that I want to talk to you about. So let me just get the quick, because depression, mental health, all that is and I'm doing this for me. The reason why I have this podcast, people think, is to help other people. No, it's to help me. No, I'm just kidding. It's because I have so many problems. It's to help me. But so there's some other trendy ways to help your brain or depression that I wanted to see where you stood. I was non-responsive to TMS therapy. Can you explain what that is, how it helps, and what you think, what your opinion is on it?
So TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. So transcranial, around the brain, magnetic, you use a magnet, and then you turn the magnet off and on to help those areas of the brain that might not be working so well work better. So where do you put the magnet for now? And I say now, and I'll explain why, is we typically put it near and above our left side of our anterior cingulate cortex. So it shoots off a magnetic energy, which we believe helps those parts of the brain that aren't working so well start to work better. Depending on who you read, it works about 37, maybe 40% of the time. And in those individuals who have not responded to traditional medications. All right. So it can work. It's non-invasive, but it doesn't work for everybody. Now it brings up a lot of other questions. Is like, where do you put the magnet?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you just said, I know that they could move the magnet for, like, I said, well, how could you treat my anxiety? And they said, we can move the magnet for another $3,000, and you can do it for another, 40 days. And then maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
And see if it does help. We have less data on that, but that's where things are going. And we'll see. The other option, it would be like, okay, you get depressed. You could do electroconvulsive therapy, where they put you to sleep and give you 2 shocks and make your whole body shake. Who wants that?
No, and that's like the old school. That's what they used to do like back in the day, right?
They used that back in the day. And believe it or not, it's fairly effective, but most people would rather have a magnet next to their head, watch TV show for 30 minutes and go home for 30 days than go through ECT.
Yeah, it's a scary. You say like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. It's frightening. So another way that, and this helped me. This did help me a lot. It didn't last. The ketamine therapy. I don't understand it. I don't get why I got more out of one session of ketamine therapy than I did 20 years cognitive talk therapy. I did go in a K-hole. It was terrifying. I thought I was dead. But when I got out, my ADD was reduced. My depression was reduced, and I felt closer to the spirit.
Yeah. If you look at the research, people have a pretty instantaneous response, which is encouraging. Why? We've got theories on how it potentially works. We suspect it helps increase, sort of through an indirect way, the secretion of something called glutamate, which makes us more active, as long as you don't get too much of it. Does it work long term? We're seeing some data that looks promising as long as you use it like you're supposed to be using
consistently. Yeah.
So we like it. Now, if there's a neurotransmitter issue, like you're not making enough of, say, norepinephrine, that makes sense. Just from experience, is if you've got something inflammatory going on, which we're seeing, and you're feeling depressed, you probably want to treat the inflammatory cause before using the ketamine.
How do you treat inflammation in the brain?
Fatty
acid, the oil, fish oil?
Well, fish oil is just a general treatment to help your membranes work better. Depending on what the agent is, whether it's mold, whether it's Lyme, whether it's Epstein-Barr virus, like omega virus, amongst others, you have to kind of know what the cause is. And then there's different treatments for each of those that you can utilize. That's a whole burgeoning field right now that we're learning a lot about.
It's pretty incredible too. Is that like also like heavy metals that are in your body and all
lead,
that stuff?
Mercury. I mean, this is all new stuff. Endobacteria and actinomycetes. Those, what people say, what are those? Well, people with water damaged parts of their house, mold, endobacteria, and actinomycetes, they have their own little environment that grow. Some people have a hard time getting rid of the breakdown products, we believe, of those substances. And that causes a lot of like brain problems, from focus to memory to mood to brain fog. Why all these problems? It's because the toxins out through your brain and the toxins throughout your whole body then too. You get muscle aches, joint pains, shortness of breath if it's in your lungs, stomach problems from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation to genital urinary problems. You're urinating more frequently. It's like people, we used to say you've got this thing called fibromyalgia,
Yes.
and there's your diagnosis. That's it. Now we're finding out there might be some reasons why people have fibromyalgia. It's not so psychosomatic, and people get that. What do? I got to feel better.
I take a pill. I take a pill that's going to take my pain away.
Or go find a drug on the street or find a drink in the cabinet.
Correct. We self-medicate.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe that I started using, it's also always the, like, which came first, the chicken or the egg with addiction. Like, I feel like I started treating my depression and ADHD at a young age because I was self-medicating, because I was doing cocaine at age 16. And that's because I realized that the cocaine obviously helped slow me down, and because I respond differently to cocaine because I have the ADHD component. What about, so guys, there is so much stuff out there. I mean, like Dr. Faber, I could talk to you forever. There's a couple more things I want to touch. Hypnosis, hypnotherapy, effective, not effective, woo-woo, true, is it real? What's your take on that?
It can be helpful. How helpful? I'd have to go look at the data, but I've sent people, notably for those people who've got some real negative, like past patterns of thinking, that are unconscious. It really helps to recircuit the brain.
It really does. Okay. And
meditation, can help. Deep breathing with meditation can help. All this. So yes, all that can help. And since we're on this, if you look at just lifestyle in general, having a wellness focused lifestyle, which means throughout the day, and how many people do this, you make sure that there are incorporated wellness activities, from say emotions, feeling calm, deep breathing, meditation, to learning, reading something positive and maybe journaling about it, to eating a healthy nutritional meal, blah, 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 blah. How many people, I've got all these people who they may not be working. They might have a lot of free time. Our brain, all right, this is what happens. Our whole surface, like we're doing right now, we're talking, we're communicating, everything's firing, we're having a good conversation. We usually feel better. Then we're by ourselves. And the electricity of our whole brain starts to say, I don't need to use all this energy. So it starts to shut down. We'll start to shoot some electricity back in our anterior cingulate area here, in our back. Sorry for using big words, called our posterior cingulate. And we'll get this linear electricity going back and forth. Well, okay, so what does that mean? It means that the rest of our brain doesn't work as well. And what do? We tend to mind wander. Okay. And if you've come from sort of negative backgrounds or, uncohesive families, you might have more negative thoughts, or you get catastrophic thoughts.
Yes.
What do? Adding wellness activities, morning, afternoon, and evening, just one activity for about an hour. It makes a huge difference.
Taking a walk, even. These
wellness camps, a lot of them, you go to, Arizona or wherever, and you pay $2,000 a day. Why do they work? Because it's every hour they have a new wellness.
It's programmed.
Activity.
You have something. It's funny that you say that, because I just got back from one of those retreats in Carlsbad on the beach, and we meditated and I felt great. And then I had to come home to my real life, So wellness is a big part of all this mental health stuff. Obviously, your behavior, what you put out there, is what you're going to get back.
All right. So you mentioned you went to a wellness camp, which is what we were talking about, and you felt great. It's like, what happens? Those urges get counteracted. Your brain's constantly put in focused areas of wellness. Now, for the substance abusers, this is where it becomes key, is you have to regiment your day to have at least 3 episodes where you're doing something that's wellness focused. If you let your brain go to default mode network, just those 2 front areas, we're more apt to say, well, I don't know, go, let's get some weed, let's go smoke, let's go drink. So
front cortex. Okay, so in AA they say self-will run riot. This is front cortex run riot. Is that right?
That would be one of the probably 3 areas we'd want to focus on. But yes.
So, Dr. Faber, you have a youth foundation, some sort of, what are you doing for the youth? A lot of our listeners are parents. I'm the mother of a troubled teenager who's right in there right now that I wish he
Yeah.
would come out and hear all this because he has a cannabis addiction. But what are you doing for our youth?
So the youth are defined as about 20 to 30-year-olds, so not the younger ones.
Okay.
Who,
All right. Young
at
adults.
this point, but it's going to expand young adults who are having an interest here in California in performing arts, whether it be singing, dancing, acting, who are inner city youth that they're really good. I mean, they're really good, but in terms of the leadership, internal acumen to help develop and work those skills, they just haven't had the experience
Exposure.
here and experiences. So the last 22 years of my life, I read probably 2-3 leadership books a month and then journal. So I've got all this information. And so what we do is go in and say, okay, you're doing this. What about dream building? What about goal setting? What about purpose? What about mental toughness? What about having a purpose? What happens if things don't go right? So it's all the things parents are too busy to teach, and they're not getting educated at school with it. And so somebody's got to come in and try to start to create a system to give them those internal skills. So we mixed fun. Like we had a BET event during BET week where we had the youth come and sing and dance.
Amazing.
And we had agents come and they got to experience the event, and then we teach them in between how to do leadership. 2 years ago, I was at an Academy Awards event at Beverly Hilton just before COVID, and I took 3 of the youth to the event, and they got
my Lord. Can you imagine how these kids must have felt?
Oh yeah, and then like one of them, it's like, I had to do the carpet, and they interviewed me, and Flora, that was the gal. She sat and watched. And then I had to go to another room. There's another, red carpet. And so they started asking me about the foundation, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, don't ask me. I go, ask Flora. So all of a sudden now Flora, who's inner city, she's never seen this. She's on the red carpet getting interviewed with cameras on her. And then like, I was looking for Flora. I go, where's Flora? Like an hour later. And now she's meeting all these people and went to another part and got interviewed by somebody else. So
yeah, screw Dr. Faber. I don't care. I got this agent. He's
right.
You're boring. I don't want to talk about your brain.
Which is fine. I want to give them wow experiences, constructive wow experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And let them see, here's the possibilities, but you've got to do the internal work to get there. People are going to love you, but guess what? People aren't going to love you. Some are going to hate you these days. I mean, just going on social media. How do you deal with all that? How do you keep pulling forward, pushing forward despite all the obstacles? So that's what we do.
That's awesome. I couldn't even imagine being a youth in this day and age. I mean, I imagine how I would be with social media. Oh my gosh. Whew, I don't know how these kids do it. So I think you're absolutely amazing. And in closing, let's say you find a lost soul, somebody that can't find sobriety, mental health issues, anxiety, depression. In a nutshell, what would you tell them to do?
And they've been through all sorts of treatment before?
Non-responsive
to treatment. Get with a physician who can be empathically attuned with what you're going through and treat accordingly. But in addition to that, it gets down to, it's real simple stuff. It's like develop a secure attachment with your doctor and other people. So unconditional acceptance. Second, build hope. Here's where you're at now, but here's where you can be in the future. So it's not all negative. Mm-hmm. And then 3, start getting some belief in yourself, have faith. So the whole faith, hope, love doesn't have to be a spiritual faith, hope, love from a church standpoint, but it has to be something real palpable where you start to get those internal experiences because they're very powerful. And when you get that and experience it, it can be a very life-changing moment.
AKA for me, meditation. It's really changed my life. It's the only thing. That's, I said I'm non-responsive to everything. Meditation. The only problem is I have to be in meditation like 5 hours a day. But anyway, so I want to do this again. I want to talk about more things because you are just like your one-stop shop to everything brain. is Dr. Faber right here and more, actually. So thank you so much. Where can we find you? Social media, books. I know you have a book out too. We didn't even get to your book. We want to talk about your book.
Yeah, you can, the places you can find me, my website, www.drjayfaber.com, or just go to Amen Clinics and do a search with my name, Dr. Faber, and you'll see that, or just Google me for that matter.
Yeah, just Google them, and
you'll see stuff.
Just a chock full of information, Dr. Faber. Thank you so much. You did me such a favor, Dr. Faber, getting up at 6 a.m. for this. Have a great day, great holiday season. I am so grateful to have had you. Thank you so much. This has been Sober Exposure with Dr. Faber and Jennifer Wild. Need more? Of course you do. The show's all about needing more. Go to my website at soberexposure.show or get stuck on my Instagram at soberexposure_podcast.